So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting the Nordic countries. On a cheeky note, just last week the Prime Minister told us not to travel abroad. But then, the Prime Minister's visit has an impressive agenda and the timing of this trip is really interesting. We are at this moment where the US and China are building to patch things up through high-level talks. But even while that's happening, countries around the world are quietly getting ready for a future that's going to be defined by strategic competition, tech rivalry, and supply chains being redrawn from the scratch. And that's exactly why India is reaching out to the Nordic region right now. Because this is not just another diplomatic tour. This is part of India's larger push to avoid being stuck in a US-China binary. Instead, India is building its own partnership with countries that are technologically strong and politically reliable. I sat down with Mr. Dakshinamurthy, a geopolitical expert, to understand why India is specifically doubling down on these middle power alliances right now.
It's become very important for India to really spread its relationship with other countries as well, and the Nordic countries and Europe in general is amongst the top targets because there is an element of uncertainty that has crept in between in the relationship between India and the US, and also India and China. There has always been a certain level of tension. So it's very practical, and probably the most pragmatic thing to do is to look at Europe, and then already there has been a Indo-EU free trade deal. So this is a kind of a continuation of the same thing.
Now, here's something that might surprise you. The Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Iceland are all small. But in the areas that actually matter for India's next phase of growth, these countries are genuinely world-class. We are talking offshore wind, green hydrogen, artificial intelligence, maritime technology and advanced manufacturing. These are not nice to haves. These are the exact technologies India needs to power its energy transition and build out its industrial base. The centerpiece of the visit is the India-Nordic Summit in Oslo, and the conversation there are expected to be heavily focused on clean energy partnerships, digital innovation and making supply chains more resilient. And here's what makes this visit even more timely. It comes right after the India-EFTA trade agreement came into force. That's significant because it opens the door for serious investments into India, potentially even from Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which is one of the largest in the world. I also spoke to Mahima Jain, a climate policy expert, on why Nordic technology and investment are so strategically valuable for India.
I think it's good to take inspiration from there, from the Nordic region, and then try to figure out how it works here. I think there's a lot of dialogue that needs to happen between the two countries and a lot of criticism that both parties need to understand where it's coming from and why we need to do things differently in India. Without understanding the nuances of the Indian context, we cannot just bring in the technology and expect it to work.
But here's the thing. If you think this visit is just about trade and technology, you're only seeing half the picture. Right now, global companies are actively trying to move manufacturing out of China, and India wants to be the obvious choice, the trusted alternative in what's being called the China Plus One strategy. For the Nordic nations, it works the other way too. India isn't just a big market, it's a big democratic market. And in a world that's getting more and more unpredictable, that matters. There's also one dimension of this visit that I don't think gets nearly enough attention. China has been quietly but aggressively expanding its presence in the Arctic. Global maritime routes are becoming strategically sensitive in ways they weren't even a decade ago. And India is now looking to work with Nordic countries on Arctic governance, polar research and maritime security. I asked Mr. Dakshinamurthy about this, about how Arctic politics is fast becoming the next big geopolitical frontier.
India is, it's not very difficult for India to tap into this area, especially the Arctic, and see how it can help India in terms of, tapping the natural resources or developing its own technology which can be used elsewhere. So the Arctic is really hotting up as a geopolitical point, which in times to come, as the climate change continues and the world becomes warmer, the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic region is really going to open up even further. So it's but natural that the Indian Prime Minister will look at it more seriously.
And before we wrap up, let's just take a moment to appreciate the symbolism here. This is the first time an Indian Prime Minister has visited Norway in over 4 decades. That alone tells you this isn't a routine visit. India is very deliberately pushing to take these ties to a completely different level. Because at a time when the global order is being redrawn, India's Nordic outreach is really about one thing: making sure India has enough partnerships, enough options, and enough strategic depth to stay autonomous, resilient, and competitive no matter how the big power dynamics play out. And that's the real story of this visit.